Thanks for watching. In this video, what I'm going to do is provide you with 3 different things to look for before you begin operating your mini skid steer. And I would suggest you do this with any mini skid steer regardless of the brand, but especially if you get an imported mini skid steer, definitely check these 3 things out. So just a little side note, I have actually gotten 3 different mini skid steers, and all of those were sourced from different auction sites. And you know, there are pros and cons to getting these things from an auction. The pro would be you can end up getting a better price once you pay all the fees. But the con to that is there's risk involved. And what I mean by risk involved is you don't know what this mini skid steer's been through. Even though this is a brand new unit, the place where I went to pick this one up, there were some other units there. It was very evident that they already had damage. And it could be damage from perhaps, the loading during the shipping. It could be saltwater corrosion damage, which was actually on my very first one. It could also be damage from machinery. So there were some there that I definitely would not want to purchase. And some of these auction sites have some photographs that are stock images. Maybe they're best images of a certain model that they're using. So that's what I mean by there's just a little bit of risk involved. But nonetheless, the very first one I got was actually a model just like this. This is the AGT Industrial LRT 23. I've been very happy with this one thus far. But the first one I got, like I said, it had some saltwater corrosion. I could tell just by the different, the hydraulic fittings and some of the other metals that were on here that this wasn't just it sitting outside. It was definitely, this has been sitting outside for months at a port, or maybe it got all that saltwater corrosion from being on the cargo ship. I'm not sure. But I've seen saltwater corrosion before, and that one definitely had it. Another little quirk about that first one was, and this leads me to my very first point, the first thing you should check before you begin operating your machine is check the oil. Now, I know that sounds a little mundane, but definitely check the oil, because that first unit that I got, the oil that was inside of it, it was very thin, it was very black. It also had a fuel smell to it. It was the strangest oil I've ever seen. And so as soon as I checked that and saw what that oil looked like, I just immediately went ahead and changed it, just to be safe, because the last thing I want is something to happen to a brand new engine. Now, if you are going to check the oil, on the right-hand side, there's actually the filler cap. It's a yellow plastic cap. It's on this side of the engine. And then also, I don't know if you can see my hand or not, but there's a little access hole. But there's a dipstick that has a yellow plastic handle, and that's how you would check the oil level. Oil drain plug is down here on the left side. And in a future video, I'm actually going to change this oil. So that's the first thing I would check before I operate my mini skid steer. The second thing I would check, and it's something I've discovered in actually almost all 3 that I've gotten, is up here in the top, and also down here, these engine mounts, sometimes these bolts, they're just loose. I've even found, actually on this particular model, one of the engine mount bolts was just up. It wasn't even screwed in. It was just sitting there up. Okay, this is a view inside of this engine compartment area. And this is actually the top of the engine right here. And as we move up, that's where the control station is. And in between here, you have all these different gauges and sensors that are mounted. So these nuts and bolts are the ones that I'm talking about that are commonly loose. And so as I move this little pointer around, you can see where these different bolts are. And I would just, do a once over and just make sure that those are tight. What I'm going to do is move the camera down a little bit. And there's some other areas that you should probably check. And so this is where the engine is mounted to the top of the fuel tank. And there's actually 4 of these. And I found that one forward of this one, we can't see it right now, but the one forward of that one, that's the one that was just sticking completely up. Just make sure you do a little once over, make sure everything's tight, because this thing does vibrate a lot. And the last thing you want to do is lose a bolt that's going to be hard to find in the future. Third thing that I would check, and I've actually just recently discovered this, and it's something that is with this particular one that I have right in front of me. I've got these hydraulic lines pulled to the side, and just so we can kind of see this, this is the fuel filler location. Engine's mounted on top of the gas tank, But even as I'm just sitting here right now, I can smell fuel a little more than what should be there. And so I'm actually loading this thing onto a trailer after I'd filled it up, and I noticed that fuel was coming out, because it was on that incline. Now, at first I thought that it was, just perhaps this fuel filler cap. I mean, it does have a little bit of a jiggle to it, but also has that over, tightening protection where it, releases. But after I took off that fuel filler cap, I could, there's a seal there. Why is there fuel coming out? And then I noticed this. So down here, just below the filler cap, there's actually the neck of the steel neck of that fuel filler is in kind of like a steel sleeve. And that goes down to this fuel tank. And they haven't completely welded this all the way around. There's actually, I can visibly see a crack. They've just done I think 4 different spot welds. And I believe that's where all that fuel, venting is coming from, as well as where that fuel is spilling out, maybe. I don't know. So what my plan is I've actually got some of this Permatex Ultra Black RTV gasket maker. And this is rated to, go on engines. I'm going to try this out first. I'm definitely not going to start welding. I mean, there's fuel in there. And plus I would have to take all this stuff out in order to weld that. So what I'm going to do is try this first, kind of start at the lowest level, and hopefully this will do the job to seal that up. But that's something I literally just noticed the other day. Really strange. But I don't know if other models are like that. I never filled the other 2 that I got before this one. I never filled them all the way up to the top. So I don't know if that was a factor for those. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to use this RTV now that I've got these lines pulled aside, and I'm going to try to fill this gap that goes around this fuel filler neck. And once that cures, I'll give it 24 hours or so. I'll test it out and see if there's fuel that's coming out. I also want to test it out to make sure the engine still runs properly, because it does need to vent, but I'm pretty sure that the fuel cap is supposed to do the venting for us. But if it does cause a problem where the engine starts to kind of sputter, it's not getting enough air, to vent, I'll just remove that RTV and start over. All right, it's been about 24 hours since I put on this RTV. The repair looks pretty good, and what I'm about to do is test it out, make sure there's no vapor lock. I'm going to see if this engine starts, kind of choking up like it needs oxygen. And actually, I need to run the machine anyway, because what I'm going to do, I'm about to plant some grass seed, and there's some really stiff spots where the dirt is really compacted. I'm going to use these tracks right here. It kind of destroys your lawn, but in this case, I need it to loosen up the top surface of the dirt. So I'm just going to drive it around in that really compacted area to get it loosened up, and we'll see how this works. So this is one of the areas, it's a corner of my backyard that I was talking about. The soil just extremely compact, but the tracks did the job. It loosened up the top quarter to half inch of the surface, and now that I have these track marks where it's disturbed that, I'll just take the stiff rake and just rake it out where I've got some loose soil on the top. That way the seed can nestle in there. All right, I finished my run up. I ran it for about 15 minutes, and I got the mini skid back in the garage. This repair where I sealed where that neck goes down into that sleeve in this fuel filler area, it didn't affect performance whatsoever. So it must not be there for ventilation. So I'm happy with the repair. I feel better now. This way, whenever I wash it, or if it is sitting outside, there's not going to be water intrusion going down in the fuel tank. So I suggest doing it. I'm glad I did it with this one. And that's something I'll look for in the future if I get some more of these skid steers.